Okay, is everyone back? Everyone got to stretch their legs a little bit, go to the bathroom, do whatever. Because, sitting in the chairs for extended period of time can be uncomfortable. So we all need our break. So glad we was able to have the break, get some water or whatever. And now we are ready to do session number 2. So in session number 1, all that I did was introducing the subject matter, giving a little bit of my testimony and how the Lord used me to come into this understanding, and how ultimately now from it I'm trying to teach and share with you the things that the Lord showed me and taught me in my initial studies of the Dead Sea Scrolls from December 2022 to March of 2023. So ultimately, the dispute among the Jewish people and the Jewish groups, as I enumerated in session number 1, was primarily a dispute over authority, meaning who has the authority amongst the Jewish people to represent the God of Israel and to represent His Torah to His people. And what goes along with that, number 2, is who is giving and explaining the correct interpretation of the Torah. So a dispute over those two things was the dispute that was ongoing. And if we take, for example, a brief outline from the Damascus document regarding the time frame by which the Qumran community was established, I'm rounding off, like 175 BC, and I'm going to round off that Yeshua was born in 0, but he wasn't. So I'm just going to round off and say, well, that's 175 years that this dispute had been going on. So you got the people, the Qumran community, and it's the corrupt temple system, and the Pharisees who are primarily on the other side. And so that begs the question, who are the Pharisees? What's their roots? What's their origination? All right, and to the best of my knowledge, we have no documentation of a people called and regarded as Pharisees in the 3rd century BC. First mention of them is in the 2nd century BC. So they surface initially in their ultimate beginnings, and it's believed that in their ultimate beginnings, they started out as a social group and even a political group. But ultimately, if you look back at history and think through history, given that the Jewish people, that is the house of Judah, went into Babylonian captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar, done in 3 stages. The ultimate stage was done around 586 BC. Then in Ezra and Nehemiah is the initial return. And in the initial return, there's the effort to rebuild the temple and to rebuild Jerusalem, that from Solomon building the first temple, that religious life centered around that temple. And it centered around the leadership of the temple. And who was the initial priest when Solomon takes his throne? It was Zadok. And so religious life centered around the temple in Jerusalem under the leadership of the Zadok priests. And I'm rounding off, so this is not an exact date. So the temple's built. Like I said, it's not an exact date. I'm rounding off. Let's say 950 BC. In the Babylonian captivity, I'm rounding off again, 550 BC, but the last taking was 586. But just to do easy math, that's 400 years. All right, so 400 years, that's a long time. We have a religious life in Jerusalem, centered in the temple, with the leadership of Zadok priests. And so 400 years is a long time. Now they go into Babylonian captivity. Guess what? There's no temple. So their center of life that they knew for 400 years isn't anymore. And the leadership is not there anymore. So there's a question of how are the Jewish people going to survive as a people in Babylonian captivity? How are they going to maintain their identity as a people? And how are they going to maintain their connection to the Torah and to Jerusalem and to the temple? So you see there was a void, there was a need. And in the process of time, you know who comes along and fills that void and fills that need? Teachers, leaders, who came out of Babylon. There were those in the land of Israel as well, but primarily they come out of Babylon. And now how are they going to get together as a Jewish people and worship together and believe in the God of Israel and follow His Torah? Well, that's where the need arose for synagogues, for local places of worship. And that was supposed to be their representation of what was originally the temple in Jerusalem. So now we have the necessity of local congregations. The Greek word is synagogue. And who's going to be the leadership? Who's going to represent the people? Well, the leaders that came along were eventually called rabbis. And so now, as this process goes along, it would be logical that at the beginning of the process for the people to ask the question, wait a second. It says in the Torah that the leadership who's supposed to be teaching us the Torah is to be the priests, the Levites. But now we're in captivity, and where they taught these things out of the temple is now destroyed, and now we have other people that study and learn the ways of the God of Israel, and they become local leaders, and they ultimately were called rabbis. So you can see the question that could be asked in the beginning of the process. The question being, now wait a second, where is your authority to teach the Torah? Because the Torah says the Torah is supposed to be taught by the priests and the Levites. So if you're a local leader, why should we listen to you? What is your authority and your credibility that we should listen to you? So you understand the rationale about the problem, the situation, and how this question initially would be asked. So what became the answer? What answer did they give to validate their authority that they should be listened to as the local leaders? Well, they came up with this idea of the doctrine of oral Torah, which encompasses a doctrine of rabbinic authority. And so the explanation comes about that at Mount Sinai, there were written commandments given, but some of those commandments that was given, the details of it was communicated orally. Now, communicating something orally is different from the doctrine of oral Torah. The doctrine of oral Torah does not only attempt to explain what happened at Mount Sinai, but the doctrine of oral Torah is centered in the doctrine of rabbinic authority and the authority of the judicial system that came about from rabbinic authority, which in the days of the first century was called the Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin is modeled after the information given in the Torah. In much the same way, we could start a church today and we can say we're modeling it after Ephesians chapter 4. And so in Ephesians chapter 4, it says in verse 11, it says, he gave some apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. That's commonly called the fivefold ministry. So I could start a church today, and ultimately, in some form or fashion, in the church that I start out, we have a leadership team. Maybe we have elders, and then we have in this church, here is our apostle, here's our prophet, here's our evangelist, here's our pastor, here's our teacher. So see, therefore, we have a church that is a biblical church. That's according to the New Testament. And now as the generations go by, we can say, well, see, we always were biblical in our approach and what we do. Because look, it says fivefold. Look, we have fivefold. We've had this fivefold ministry for 200 years. This church has been around for 200 years. So see, we're biblical. Now we got to tell everyone that we were formed, and what we're doing, comes straight from the Bible. So it's a modeling. So we can the same way. We are told in the Torah that there were judges over the people. And there were 70 judges over the people. So now we could set up a system modeling that, so we can be doing it according to the Torah does. And ultimately that model became called the Sanhedrin. So in the first century, who were primarily on the Sanhedrin? Pharisees and Sadducees. Okay? And were the Zadok priests and the Qumran, who followed a different calendar than what the Sanhedrin did, or the Pharisees and the Sadducees in the corrupt temple system? Were they the representative leadership of the Sanhedrin? No. There was a dispute between them over authority. And so you can see from the Babylonian captivity, there were leaders arose. And then, how and why are we supposed to listen to you? Well, the answer is because at Mount Sinai, there was a written Torah, and then instructions were given orally. And now our explanation is, those instructions that was given orally and went from Moses to Joshua, and they got passed down. And ultimately, it got passed down to us, the leaders. And then it says in Deuteronomy chapter 17 and verses 8 through 11, it says, if there arrives a matter too hard for you in judgment, between plea and plea, between stroke and stroke, being matters of controversy within your gates, you will arise, and you will get to the place which the Lord your God will choose, and you will come to the priests, the Levites, and unto the judge that shall be in those days, and inquire, and they will show you the sentence of judgment. And you shall do according to the sentence which they have that place which the Lord will choose to show you. You shall observe to do according to all that they inform you, according to the sentence of the Torah which they will teach you, according to the sentence that they will tell you. They shall do. You shall not decline from the sentence which they will show you to the right, to the left. So now they go back to the Torah and they say, oh, you see these verses right here? That was talking about us. And we are the judges in the day. And we were given the authority here in Deuteronomy 17, verses 8 through 11. And so what we teach you, what we tell you, which by the way, you can't understand the Torah by yourself. You need our help. You need our interpretation. So don't study on your own what the Torah says. Don't read the written Torah yourself and try to learn and understand what it means, because you can't do it. You need us. So go to your leader, and we will explain to you the interpretation, and you accept our authority when we explain to you the interpretation. And so, that's what's told to the Jewish people today. And so now they're being told that we represent the God of Israel. We represent the Torah. And this is how the authority was given to us. So this doctrine of oral Torah among the three major groups, the Qumran community, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees, of these three groups, did all three have and embrace and to teach the doctrine of oral Torah? No, it was just the Pharisees. The Sadducees didn't have the doctrine, and they didn't teach and embrace the doctrine of oral Torah, and neither did the Qumran community. So now we only have one of the three groups that has the doctrine. In the one group that's got the doctrine of oral Torah, they claim that they are the originals. They're the originals. They go back to Mount Sinai. And in the Midrash Rabbah, it actually says that the question that a yeshiva student asked his rabbi today in 2025, that was actually given to Moses at Mount Sinai. And they say that what was given orally got transferred and handed down from generation to generation. And what is being taught by the rabbis today is, they say 100% exactly what was given to Moses and was given some instructions orally. And somehow we're supposed to believe that. So I don't know about you, but when I was in Sunday school class, when I was about 10 years old, we had 8 or 10 people in our Sunday school class. And one day the teacher whispered something to one of us there at the class and said, I want you to tell it to the next person. So we told it to 10 people, and then we're going to tell it back to the teacher. And when they got back to the teacher, it was something completely different than what the teacher originally told the first person. And so you can even tell now, this is what happened to me, or I had this issue with my friend or this family member, and well, what happened? Well, this is what happened. And so they tell you, and then now you tell somebody else, and now, is it exactly what you was originally told? Is it exactly what happened? I mean, you yourself know that some things gets left out, some things gets modified, but yet we're supposed to believe from the time of Mount Sinai to now that 100% of what was said was transmitted, faithfully without error to today. So therefore, what's being taught today is 100% that was being taught there. I mean, that's the doctrine. And the Jewish people are told, well, believe that because that's how it is. And that's your faith. That's your faith. As a Jew, we call Judaism. Okay? And so now that's what I, as a non-Jew, I'm being told that I'm supposed to believe that, if I'm following Torah, that's what I'm supposed to believe and accept as well. Okay? But there was a division among the Jewish groups in the first century, but it actually goes back to the 2nd century BC, regarding this authority and the interpretation. And the Zadok priests and the Qumran didn't have the doctrine of oral Torah. But the Zadok priests and the Qumran, they did claim that they had authority to be the leaders and the teacher of Israel, just like the rabbis did, just like the Sanhedrin did. And so if I could find this, if I do this enough times, I get memorized what page it's on, but I haven't done it enough times yet by referring to this book. But actually, let's go to, here we go. This is it's called the rule of the community. I mean, you might say the Constitution. This is everybody that belongs to our community. This is the principles by which we are to operate. So, one thing you need to understand about the Qumran and its community. Even though we all may have a common belief that we believe in following the Torah, keeping the Sabbath festivals and whatnot, and that we're all in agreement regarding that, at the same time, while we allow ourselves to learn from teachers that we may respect, at the same time, we still permit ourselves to be individuals and think independently. And if we have our own independent views, we think it's okay. And nobody's got to come and tell you that that's not okay to do that, because everyone does that, and it's kind of accepted that that's the way it is. All right. However, that was not the way it was in the Qumran community. The Qumran community, you could only be a part of it if you were accepted into it. And in being accepted into it, you had to make an oath that you would follow the rules of the community under the authority of the Zadok priests. If you did not agree to that, you were not accepted into the community. And the Zadok priest kept the festivals according to the priestly calendar that's outlined in detail here in the scrolls. And so you deciding when you think Passover is, it was not an option if you believed, if you were a member of the Qumran community. Everybody did it and followed it the same way. All right? And in doing that, it says here in the rule of the community, it says, these are the regulations that govern when they have gathered together as a community. Everyone who joins the party of the Yahad, so that's a Hebrew word that comes from echad, which means unity, together, oneness. So they called themselves the Way. They called themselves the Sons of Light. And they referred to themselves as, we are the community. We are the one community. We are the Yahad. So everyone that joins the Yahad, he shall take upon himself a binding oath to return to the Torah of Moses and to all that's been revealed from the Torah to the sons of Zadok, the priests and the preservers of the covenant. So I just read to you what's required of everyone that joins the community. They were required to submit to the leadership of the Zadok priests because they were the teachers. And then the judgments regarding the proper way to follow the Torah, the proper interpretation of the Torah, was under the authority of the Zadok priests. And so the corrupt temple system, the Pharisees had their judicial system. It was called the Sanhedrin. But there was a judicial system to make rulings in the Qumran under the authority of the Zadok priests. So these two systems were in conflict with each other. The authority that's being claimed by the Zadok priests is in conflict with the authority being claimed by the corrupt temple system and the authority being claimed by the rabbis through the Pharisees in their judicial court, which is the Sanhedrin. So the Zadok priests, they did not teach the doctrine of oral Torah. So in order to claim their authority, the Pharisees, they claimed their authority over the Zadok priests through the doctrine of oral Torah. So the doctrine of oral Torah encompasses the teaching that there were written commandments, and then some written commandments and the details about how to do them was done orally, but the central element of the doctrine of oral Torah was not that some things may have been communicated orally, because something being communicated orally is different than the doctrine of oral Torah. And so then when the rabbis and the Sanhedrin makes a ruling, they're claiming their authority, that their ruling speaks for, and it's a ruling of, the God of Israel. And so the one that's claiming their authority through the doctrine of oral Torah isn't claiming that authority because they are the legitimate high priests in Israel. The Zadok priests are claiming their authority because they say our authority goes back to the Torah, when after the sin of the golden calf, that we have the establishment of the Levitical priesthood, and the God of Israel said that the high priest office is to come from Aaron and his sons. So our authority is based upon that decree by the God of Israel, and from the days of the start of Solomon's reign, and Zadok being the priest, all the priests in Israel, from that Zadok priest, they were all Zadok priests until the priesthood office got corrupted, and now the rabbis in the Sanhedrin is now claiming the authority of the office of the high priesthood. So I'm telling you all that to try to amplify that the major issue of debate was who has the authority to teach Torah in Israel. And then secondly, what comes with that authority is what is the proper interpretation of following that Torah. So there's various places. Here, I'm going to read it here. Here's one place. This is in the rule of the community. And where and how they look to follow the Torah in the Qumran. So I'm going to read two things here from this paragraph. One is their claim that their community was started and established based upon Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. And secondly, the way in which they're going to attempt to follow the Torah under the leadership of the Zadok priest. So it reads here in the rule of the community. When such men as these come to be in Israel, in other words, when they join the covenant community, conforming to the oath to follow the rules of the community, they shall separate from the session of perverse men, in other words, those that don't accept the authority of the Zadok priest. And in separating from perverse men, they are to go into the wilderness, there to prepare the way of truth, as it is written. And now they quote Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. But as I mentioned in session number 1, that word desert in Hebrew is Arava, and it's a geographical location. So that's why I'm showing you here that they themselves, in looking for direction on what they're supposed to do with the corruption of the office of the high priesthood, they're getting direction from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, because that tells them where to go in the Arava. It tells them what to do to prepare themselves for the coming of the Messiah. Then it goes on to say, this means the expounding of the Torah decreed by God through Moses for obedience, that being defined by what has been revealed for each age, and by what the prophets have revealed by his Holy Spirit. So there are prayers in here for the direction and the leading of the Zadok priest to follow the Torah under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So they looked to follow the Torah according to the leading and the direction of the Holy Spirit. Now, amongst the Pharisees, among the rabbis, even today in Orthodox Judaism, you go and ask an Orthodox Jew, are you trying to follow the Torah with the help and the inspiration of the Holy Spirit? They'll look at you like, what? So let me tell you what actually happened to me. I was in Israel back in, I think, 2016. And I was with an Orthodox Jew, and he said, well, how do you know where to put your mezuzah on the door? And he said, you need the rabbis to tell you. And I said, I don't know, maybe by the Holy Spirit. And he just sat and laughed at me. That you're supposed to follow the Torah by the Holy Spirit. So it's not in their thought process that they follow the Torah by the Holy Spirit. They follow the Torah by the decrees and the rulings of the rabbis and the Sanhedrin. And their rulings are written down in something called the Mishnah. And then there's commentary on the rulings. And the total compilation is then called the Talmud. So if you just understand that very basic thing, the Pharisees don't look to follow the Torah by the Holy Spirit, but the Qumran community and the Zadok priest did. And now, only with that background, something that you would read and you would just accept and not think anything of, but when Paul writes something like Romans chapter 8, verse 14. For as many that are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. That statement is taking a side in a religious dispute. And I bet you when you read that verse, you're not thinking that a side's being taken on a religious dispute, because you've been taught over and over and over and over and over, we're to follow and be guided by the Holy Spirit. And so you've been taught that all your life, and so you just accept it, you read it and go on, don't think anything of it. Oh yeah, that's right. But you're not realizing that that is a statement in a religious dispute of taking sides, and that statement would be a statement that would be aligned with the Qumran community. This is a statement that's not aligned with Pharisaic thought and following the Torah. Furthermore, in Romans chapter 7, we have where Paul is affirming following the Torah, because he says in Romans chapter 7, verse 12, the Torah is holy, the commandment holy, and the Torah is just and good. And so then he says in Romans 7, verse 22, Paul himself declares, I delight in the Torah of God after the inward man. And so he just said how he followed the Torah after the inward man. We would say after the help and the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Well, when Paul was brought up a Pharisee at the feet of Gamaliel, he wasn't taught that you follow the Torah after the inward man. So when he says, I follow the Torah after the inward man, he's taking sides in the Jewish religious dispute. And he's taken the viewpoint of the side of the Qumran community, and he's not following how he was taught to follow the Torah, being instructed by Gamaliel in Jerusalem. So that simple thing, like that right there, Paul is writing in his letters, and he's making statements regarding, the right interpretation to follow the Torah. All right, so now let me continue to read to you from the rule of the community. I thought I found the page here, but it specifies here what the attributes and the characteristic of following the Torah by the Holy Spirit looks like. Okay, here it is. I found it. All who walk in this Spirit, that is the Holy Spirit, they will receive a crown of honor forever and ever. And all those that walk in this Spirit, all those that walk in the Holy Spirit, they will know peace and long life and perpetual joy. All right, now wait a second. Paul makes the statement in Romans chapter 8 and verse 6, to be spiritually minded, that is to follow the Torah, is life and peace. Well, the Qumran community just says all that follow this Spirit will have peace and long life. And it also goes on to say other characteristics of walking in the Spirit, which is not exactly 100% the same, but it's analogous to what Paul writes in Galatians in chapter 4, verse 22, that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith. So when Paul's making the statement about the fruit of the Spirit, he's taking sides in the religious dispute that we, like I said, we otherwise wouldn't recognize, and we wouldn't view it that way. And then furthermore, here it is, I found it. In the rule of the community, it says, the Holy Spirit, this Spirit engenders humility, patience, abundant compassion, perpetual goodness, understanding, and powerful wisdom. So some of those things is what Paul, amplifies and calls the fruit of the Spirit. So Paul there is iterating teachings that are in the Qumran, teachings that are taught by the Zadok priests, that in being believers in Yeshua, he's writing letters and telling those who's reading his letters that this is the way you follow Messiah, and this is the proper way to follow the Torah. So, to explain another distinction and difference between the Qumran community and the Pharisees, the Pharisees had a teaching that prophecy ended with Malachi. Now, their statement that prophecy ended with Malachi, that got picked up by the Protestant world. And over the years, as I've been in church, I've heard pastors say that prophecy ended with Malachi. It's because, you know who ultimately put the stamp and called the Hebrew Scriptures, this is canon, this is the Tanakh, these are the books of the Bible that we're going to regard as being inspirational? Who determined that canon? It was determined by the Pharisees. And so because of that, we have no books in, I'm going to call this, what I'm carrying here, the Protestant Bible, okay? So in the Protestant Bible, we don't have any books of writings that was in 2nd century BC, 3rd century BC, 1st century BC, because we're basically affirming that which was stamped by the Pharisees and the declaration that this is our canon. However, the Qumran community did not have the belief system that prophecy ended with Malachi. As a matter of fact, Josephus says that in the Qumran, that the Qumran was well known for having prophets there who gave prophecies that came true. And Josephus tells about one that is actually mentioned in Acts chapter 13. And let's go to Acts chapter 13 and see who this person that Josephus, the Jewish historian of the first century, who he mentions. It says in Acts chapter 13, verse 1, "Now there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers." Now just that part, that they were prophets, that's taking sides in the religious dispute. Because the Pharisees didn't believe that there were prophets in their days, because prophecy and prophets ended with Malachi. So when you read that, you're not going to think that you're reading a religious dispute. You're just accepting what's being said. But it's a viewpoint of a Jewish religious dispute that there actually are prophets and teachers. And one of them is called here Manaen. Well, that's the Greek name. The Hebrew name is Menachem. So this Manaen or Menachem is mentioned in the Talmud in Haggadah 16b. And it says there in the Talmud that this Manaen, he was a leader of the Sanhedrin along with Hillel. And it says that he left the Sanhedrin and took 80 pair of students with him. And when he left, Shammai took his place. So you probably heard of people talking about Hillel and Shammai, who were leaders of the Sanhedrin, but you probably haven't heard of Menachem. No, so he took 80 pair of students with him. Where did he go? He went to the Qumran. Where does he show up? He shows up in Acts chapter 13. Well, Josephus tells a story about this Manaen, that prior to Herod becoming king, he prophesied to Herod that he would one day be king. And Herod thought it was unrealistic and unreasonable at the time that he was given the prophecy, so he dismissed it. But later on, Herod becomes king. And when he becomes king, he summons Menachem to him again and says, "Okay, now I remember you telling me that I'd be king, and guess what? I'm king. Could you tell me how long I'll be king?" And he says, "Am I going to be king for 10 years? Menachem didn't say anything. 20 years, Menachem didn't say anything. 30 years, Menachem didn't say anything. Which in effect he was saying it's going to be at least 30 years, but I'm not going to give you an exact number. Well, Herod got to be king for 30 years. He was happy about that, so he didn't try to pin him down to an exact number of years. And so then Josephus says that we wanted to tell you this because the Qumran community, which he called the Essenes, is known for having prophets in their midst. And here's what it says in Acts chapter 13 about Manaen. It says, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch. So it makes a statement that he's connected with Herod. Now, because of the positive word that Manaen had for Herod, believe it or not, because he was kind of a cruel guy, he had a sympathy in his heart for the Qumran community because of this prophecy, because of Manaen. So Herod gave the southwest corner of Jerusalem to be a place that was called the Essene quarter of Jerusalem. And this was an area of Jerusalem that Herod gave the Qumran community because of the favor that the Qumran community had from the prophecy that Menachem gave to Herod. And guess what? Do you know where the quote-unquote Last Supper of Yeshua was held? It was held in the southwest corner of Jerusalem. It was held in the Essene quarter. So now, when Yeshua is having his Last Supper in the Essene quarter of Jerusalem, by having it there, he's taking a position in the religious dispute. He's affirming the Jews that live there. And in the temple scroll, so the temple scroll is a big scroll. It said that there were affiliated communities of the Qumran that were throughout Israel and even outside of Israel. There were affiliated communities. It wasn't just only this Qumran community. And so they represented a belief system that others connected to throughout Israel and even outside of Israel. So it says in the temple scroll that there were several villages outside of Jerusalem that was affiliated and associated with the group from the Qumran community that lived in Jerusalem. Now, ultimately, this is the group that James is over. And when James is over this group, James is called a bishop. Now, in the scrolls here, they had leaders in the Qumran community, leaders that was under the Zadok priests in their community, and it's rendered here in the scrolls as overseers. But it's the same meaning as bishop. So the terms in the title of bishop comes from the Qumran community in the titles that they gave in their rulership. So James was called the first bishop. So that gives you a hint, it gives you a clue of his affiliation with the Qumran. And so there were several villages that were associated with the Qumran group in Jerusalem. And what I'm about to tell you, I didn't derive myself. I'm telling you something that academic scholars have mentioned, and I read this information from academic scholars, that you can look up on the internet. So like I said, this is not my independent thought. But these scholars have said that there's a strong belief that one of these villages outside Jerusalem that was affiliated with the Qumran was Bethany. So John, in the Gospel of John, at the end of the Gospel of John, he tells us the following. He tells us that in verse 25, there's many other things that Yeshua did, and if they all would be written, every one, I suppose even the world itself cannot contain the books that would be written and said. But the things that I told you, I specifically told you. I could tell you so much more, but I specifically told you these things. And so one of the things that John chose to tell us about was as Yeshua is approaching his last week in John chapter 11, he goes to this town called Bethany, and he resurrects this person by the name of Lazarus, which was the town of Mary and her sister Martha. Now, that was a literal person by the name of Lazarus. But if I take Lazarus back into the Hebrew, it's Eleazar. And Eleazar is one of the sons of Aaron, and I haven't gone over it with you yet, but ultimately the office of the high priesthood was originally for Aaron and his 4 sons, and I'll have to do it maybe in next session. But that office got narrowed down to just Ithamar and Eleazar, but then it got narrowed down to only Eleazar, and then it only got narrowed down within Eleazar to the Zadok line. So you know how the Torah, there's the literal, but then there's the deeper meaning, there's the hint, there's the clue that's in the text as well. So at the hint or at the clue level, since Lazarus means Eleazar, we could view that at the hint level. This is not Peshat now. That Eleazar is a hint to the resurrection of the priesthood of Eleazar, which, if you understand the details of it, is a hint to the resurrection of the Zadok priesthood. And when Yeshua resurrects Lazarus, what is the response of the temple authority and the Pharisees? It says, many of the Jews, this is John 11:45, many of the Jews which had came to Mary and had seen the things that Yeshua did believed on him. Then some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Yeshua did. He gathered together the chief priests and the Pharisees a council and said, what do we do, for this man does miracles? If we let Yeshua alone and continue to do what he's doing, everyone will believe on him, and the Romans will take away our place in our nation. In other words, we're going to lose our authority. So we don't want to lose our authority, and if we let him doing, people's going to follow him. But obviously, if they follow him, they're not following us. So that tells you right now that the Pharisees viewed that those that followed Yeshua wouldn't be following them, the Pharisees. So he was proclaiming something different, that they wouldn't follow him, and they were concerned that their authority be taken away. And then it goes on to say, verse 53, then from that day forth they took counsel together to put him to death. All right. So John chose to tell us this event, which kind of like happens, that leads up to Yeshua's last week. So what was so important and significant that of the resurrection of Lazarus in Bethany, that was such a threat that they wanted to kill him? Well, Bethany means the house of the poor, the house of the afflicted. And the Qumran community was sensitive to taking care of the poor, the widow, the needy. And that's why they lived as a community, to make sure everybody's needs were taken care of. So they were very sensitive to taking care of the poor and the needy, etc. And they had a designated village that was a village of theirs where these things happened. It was called Bethany. So now when Yeshua is resurrecting Lazarus in Bethany, Yeshua is bringing attention to a village that's associated with the Qumran community. And he's not giving attention to the temple and the corrupt system and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. When Yeshua is resurrecting Lazarus, he's taking sides in the religious conflict. So when we read the story, we read it as a story, and we're not viewing it as he's taking sides. He's just doing a miracle. But if you understand the background and what's going on, he's taking sides in the religious conflict. And in the natural, from him taking sides in the religious conflict, they wanted to kill him. Because he's on the wrong team. He's on the wrong side. He's hanging around with a group that challenges the authority of the corrupt temple system, a group that challenges, and he's not affirming the Pharisees. He's not affirming their authority. And something that is not readily in our mind about Bethany. So Yeshua is not only doing this important thing in Bethany, which they wanted to kill him, which was an event leading up to his last week. But in Luke chapter 24, he says to them in verse 49 and through 51. First of all, Yeshua says, I'm going to send you the promise of my Father upon you. Tarry you in the city of Jerusalem till you be endued on power from on high. So when you read that, you're just going to accept that, oh yeah, that's taking us to the day of Pentecost. Yeah, the Holy Spirit was outpoured. You just read it's a story and you go on. But when Yeshua says, tarry in Jerusalem till you be endued on power on high, he's taking sides in the religious conflict. Because the Pharisee says prophecy had ended. They're not looking to be endued from power on high. So who does believe in the Holy Spirit? Who does believe that prophecy is for day? Who does believe that they're going to be endued on power on high? Well, that's something that the Qumran community is going to believe. So is the Pharisees going to show up in Jerusalem in Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost to be endued from power on high? No, that's not their doctrine. So to put it this way and put it in Christian terms, in their day, the Qumran community were the Jewish Pentecostals. So they were okay with this person that they believe was the Messiah that healed the blind, the deaf, the lame, the dumb, etc. They're okay. That's Pentecostal things. But when he did that, what did not impress them was the Baptist crowd. So the Pharisees were the Jewish Baptists. They said that prophecy ended with Malachi. There's Baptist groups that say, well, all that stuff ended when the last apostle died. And so since then, we're not in the day of miracle dreams and visions and healing and prophecy and all this stuff. I mean, that's the doctrine of some Baptist groups like today. So that's why I say the Pharisees were the Jewish Baptists. But the ones that believed that prophecies were day, that believed in dreams and visions, that believed in healing the sick, etc., was the Qumran community, was the Jewish Pentecostals. And the Baptists didn't like the Pentecostals, and the Pentecostals didn't like the Baptists. And so now Yeshua, after making this statement, he says, and he led them out as far as to Bethany. He lifted up his hands and blessed them. And it came to pass as he blessed them. Where's he blessing them from? According to Luke 24, he's blessing them from Bethany. So he's blessed them from Bethany, and he parted from them, and he was carried up to heaven. Luke 24, 50 and 51 says that Yeshua went to be with his Father, and he left from Bethany. Do you realize when he's leaving from Bethany, he's taking sides in the religious dispute? Because Bethany is a village associated with the Qumran. So he's emphasizing the Bethany and resurrecting Lazarus. He's emphasizing Bethany, and when he's leaving to be with his Father. And so he's favoring the Qumran community at the expense of the temple system and at the expense of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And these are things that you read, you know about. I'm not telling you, when I'm reading this, it's not like you're unaware of it. You're aware of it, but you just didn't see the connection before. And so this goes back, and I've just only showed you a few examples. I've run out of time now for my second session. But I've just showed you a few examples where the issue of the religious dispute is going on. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts. The things that Yeshua is doing, he's taking sides in the religious dispute. And this religious dispute is the temple system and the Sadducees and the Pharisees versus the Qumran. And where and at times that Yeshua is favoring the Qumran. In effect, when he's favoring the Qumran, he's favoring the authority of the Zadok priests. And in effect, by extension, he's favoring how they follow the Torah, which is by the Holy Spirit. In effect, he's favoring their calendar that they followed and did. And so now, they were the minority group in their day. They didn't. The majority group that had the most influence of the people was the temple system and the Pharisees. So they had the temple system, the Pharisees had the greater authority. They used their authority and their dominance of their authority that they had, and they decided, oh, Yeshua threatens our authority. We want to kill him so that we can keep and maintain the authority. So actually, Yeshua is born in a religious dispute that had been ongoing for a long time. Originally, it was a dispute over authority and the interpretation of the Torah. When Yeshua came, the dispute, a third dimension was added. And the third dimension that got added was, is he the Messiah or not? So now the dispute revolved there. So, like, in the dispute, well, the Qumran community, they ended up believing as a group that he was the Messiah. That's why the very first believers were called, what do we got to name them? What do we got to call them? They were called the Way. Why were they called the Way? Because they were called the Way. When they were founded based upon Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, it says, prepare the way in the wilderness. And in here, they called themselves the Way in various places. So if they were called the Way, we still call them the Way. We don't have any other name for them. But then eventually in Antioch, they were called Christians. Okay, but they were, originally, they were called the Way. So I've just given you a few examples to begin to amplify. Going back when I told the story about Brad Scott, when he came and challenged me about, where's this two-house stuff? And I go, it's everywhere. So now I'm giving you a few examples where they say, okay, where's this issue about the Qumran and the conflict with that and the calendar and authority? Like, where's that? Where's that in the Gospels? Where does Yeshua address it? And so my answer is the same one that I give to Brad. What do you mean, where's it at? It's like everywhere. You're reading into the issue of the conflict. And so we're going to take our lunch break now. And we will continue with several more sessions after lunchtime as we go into the afternoon and into the evening. So I've only got this introduced, and I'll be going into more specific detail in the ensuing lessons today and tomorrow. So I pray that you're enjoying what you're hearing so far, but we have more to learn. But in the meantime, let's enjoy the holiday and let's enjoy our fellowship together, okay? So make sure you have good fellowship with each other as we sit around the table and eat, okay? Blessings.